Alright friends, today we're going to discuss the reproductive system. And if you can tell by this picture, boys have penises, girls have vaginas, and thanks for coming to my TED Talk. No, there's a little bit more to it than that. So, in the two sexes, you have primary sex organs. So these are going to be the organs that make the sex cells, or the gametes. For males, the sex organ is the testes, and that cell would be sperm. In the female, the sex organ is the ovaries, and the sex cell would be the ova, or the egg. And then you have all your secondary sex organs. So these are things that you need for sexual reproduction. So what is something that the male sex needs for sexual reproduction? Well, the penis is a big one, right? That one's pretty important. How about for females? Well, you're going to need the vagina, right? And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it, like seminal vessels, bulbourethral glands, prostates, vulvas, labia, like a lot of other stuff that we will get into. So if we're looking at your reproductive organs, we can classify their structures as being either external or internal. If we look at the female's external structures, you have the mons pubis. That's going to be this fatty pad that lays on top of the pubic bones where the pubic symphysis is. The labia majora and minora, so these are the vaginal lips. The outer one is the majora, the inner one is the minora. The clitoris, which is erectile tissue. The vaginal orifice, vestibular bulbs. These run lateral to the orifice, and these are also erectile tissue, so as the female gets stimulated, these bulbs swell up a little bit. The vestibular glands, which add lubricants, and then periurethral glands that you'll find on either side of the urethra. In the males, you have the penis and the scrotum. So externally, males are really simple. The scrotum is going to be the sac that holds the testes. If you move to the inside, the females have the ovaries, the uterine tubes, the uterus, the vagina. The males have the testes, the epididymis, ductus deferens, seminal vesicles, prostate, bulbourethral glands. So males are a little bit more complicated on the inside than females are. Complicated. More structures to know. So secondary sexual characteristics aren't the same as saying secondary sexual structures. So for the characteristics, these are things that you look at as and recognize as being male or female. And so a lot of these secondary sexual characteristics don't develop until adolescence and the hormones start taking place. So one that we talked about with the respiratory system is the Adam's apple, right? That's a secondary sexual characteristics. Typically in males with testosterone, you're going to see a growth in that Adam's apple region. Maybe facial hair is another thing that's typically seen in males. Broader shoulders, maybe heavy, more muscle. And then for females, well, breast is one. Wider hips would be another, a lack of facial hair. So there are certain characteristics that we attribute to one sex or the other. So looking at the males first, here you can see the scrotum, so that external structure that forms the sac that holds the testes. It also holds the epididymis right here. Here you can see that epididymis a little bit better. So here's the head, and it comes down to the tail of the epididymis. And then that tail turns into the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens. And here's the ampulla of the ductus deferens that then joins up with the urethra at the ejaculatory. Well, actually, it joins up with the seminal vesicle at the ejaculatory duct. And that ejaculatory duct joins up with the urethra in the prostate. So in that prostatic urethra is where you have the meeting of the ejaculatory duct and the urethra. And then right below that, you're going to have your bulbourethral glands that are in the membranous urethra. and then you go down to your spongy urethra. And that spongy urethra is going to be right here in the corpus spongiosum, and then superficial to that, and superior to that, you're going to see your corpus cavernosum. This is a paired structure, so on either side you have this erectile tissue, and then in the middle, inferior, you're going to have the spongiosum. And then here you can see the bladder. Here's the rectum and the anus and how everything sits in there. There's that bobourethral gland. Here's the ejaculatory duct again with your seminal vesicle and the ductus deferens meeting up there. If you take a closer look at the testes, you're going to have this wrapping called the tunica albuginea. Albuginea just says white, and so this is a white covering on the testes, and it's actually inside of another tunic called the tunica vaginalis. So you have the albuginea, and then you look at the testes if you cut into it, and you'll see it's set up in these lobes. In these lobes, you have these seminiferous tubules that are going to be making sperm. If you cut into one of those tubules, it looks like this. And so you have these cells that are the germ cells that are going to be making the sperm, or the spermatogenic cells. You can even see some of these are starting to get tails. And so these little spermatids are made in this duct, and then as they move up, they become more and more mature. You get to the rete testes, to your efferent ductiles. The efferent ductiles take the sperm to the epididymis. It's important to note right now that during all of this time, the sperm aren't swimming on their own. So all the cells that are associated with these, you're going to find cilia, and so they're going to be beating, and they're going to be moving the sperm along this path. So you get into the epididymis, you come out of the tail of the epididymis, up into your ductus deferens. The ductus deferens joins this blood vessel nerve complex called the pampiniform plexus, and it's all wrapped up in a sheet called the spermatic cord. So here you can see the spermatic cord. So it all comes up here and enters through the inguinal region. So if you look in this picture, you can see how this pampiniform plexus enters through here, and then you have your testicular artery and vein going up, and the ductus deferens wrapping around the bladder to then meet up with the seminiferous glands. Not seminiferous, seminal. Alright, so looking at this view here, you can see the anus, and then there's a perineal raphe. Remember, perineal, this area between the anus and the genitals, not to be confused with peroneal, the region that is lateral on the lower leg. This perineal raphe continues up onto the scrotum, and it really separates, or is an external way to see the septum between the left and right testis. So there's a membrane here that keeps the two testes separate from each other. Alright. Two other things that I want to mention is going to be the dartus muscle. So the dartus muscle is associated with the scrotum, and at rest it can be really kind of saggy like this, but then when that dartus muscle gets the signal, it can contract, and it brings all that skin in nice and tight. And that's controlled by smooth muscle. And then you have another smooth muscle right here that is attached to the testy itself. This is going to be your cremaster muscle. And what this muscle does is when the scrotum or the testy gets too cold, it actually constricts up and pulls the testicles closer to the body. And that's to keep them warmer. The testes stay outside of the body because it has to be cooler for sperm to mature and to grow. Something that was observed in the 70s when tight bell-bottom jeans were a thing was that you actually had decreased fertility because the testes were held too close to the body and they were too warm, and that ended up decreasing the overall fertility in the 70s, and maybe even now with skinny jeans. So sperm flow starts down at the tubules, through the reed, up into the efferent ductile, to the epididymis, to the ductus deferens, to the ejaculatory duct, and then it's in the urethra. Looking at the erectile tissue of the penis, you will see the paired corpus cavernosum. So with parasympathetic innervation, you'll get an erection, and that's just because this tissue here is engorging with blood. So it's filling up with blood. It's a hydrostatic organ. And then inferior, you have the corpus spongiosum, and you can see the urethra going through that. All right, so trace the sperm from spermatogenesis to ejaculation out the urethra. You'll go testes with the seminiferous tubules, efferent tubules, epididymis, ductus deferens, ejaculatory duct, prostate. And then what are the erectile tissues? Corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosum, and cavernosum is the one that is paired. What glands support the sperm on their travel? That's going to be the prostate gland, seminal vesicles, and bulbourethral gland. And in physiology, we would talk a lot more about what those three glands are doing and how does a sperm mature on its path. This is anatomy, so we're going to just stick with what they are. And that's it for the male reproductive system. We'll pick up next time with the female.